Alright, so now I've decided to change the order in which I teach all of the factoring this year, so my numbering is a little bit different. Okay, the order in which I'm going to do it this year is greatest common factor, which was in the last video. And then I'm going to do all of the factoring with 3 terms. Those are the trinomials, when a is either equal to 1 or a is not equal to 1. So we're going to start here with 3 terms. And like I just said, that is general trinomials. This is basically backwards FOIL. And the ones we're going to start out with always have a equal to 1. We'll get to the ones where a does not equal 1 in just a few minutes. Okay, so first thing I want to look at here, I have 3 terms, but do I have a greatest common factor? Well, there's a 1 coefficient here, a -6, and an 8. I can't divide those by anything other than 1, so I don't have a greatest common factor. There's also no x in every term, so I can't do that either. So we're going to go straight to the backwards FOIL. So that's where we have 2 sets of parentheses right next to each other. And I've got to figure out, to get an x squared, what do I need to multiply together? Well, I'm going to multiply an x times an x. Now I've got to figure out whether I need plus signs or minus signs, or maybe one of each in these parentheses. To multiply together and get a positive 8, I'm going to need to multiply either 2 positive numbers together or 2 negative numbers together. How do I know which one I need? Okay, so this plus here tells me I'm going to have the same sign in both parentheses. This one tells me which sign goes in both parentheses. So both of these are going to be subtract. And now here's the part that you have to work out a little bit harder than, sometimes rather than others. To multiply and get an 8, I can do a 1 and an 8, or I can do a 2 and a 4. Well, whatever multiplies together to be 8 also has to add to be -6. So here, both of these are negative. So all of these factors over here are negative, because -1 times -8 gives me a positive 8. -2 times -4 gives me a positive 8. So which pair of those will add to be a -6? That is the -2 and the -4. That is your factored answer. Now for number 12. I do not have a greatest common factor. I have 3 terms, so I'm going to go straight to my 2 parentheses. To multiply and get x squared, I'm going to multiply x times x. Because this is positive, I know I'm going to put the same sign in both parentheses. This tells me they are both going to be positive. So now I'm going to list my factors of 6 out here to the side. I can multiply 1 times 6 or 2 times 3. Because I put a positive in both of these parentheses, all of those are going to be positive. So which pair of those will add up to be 7? Well, that is the 1 and the 6. This is your factored form. And remember, here's what you've got to remember. These 2 numbers here multiply to equal the last term. They also have to add to equal the middle term. Okay. This is our factored answer, because 6 times 1 gives me a positive 6. 1 plus 6 gives me a 7. Now the x takes care of itself. Now, number 13. If you look at 13, it's got a coefficient here. And remember, the title for this section was when a is equal to 1. So what's going on here with number 13? My a value is not a 1, it's a 3. Here's where you have to remember that you've got to look at greatest common factor before you start counting terms. I can divide all three of these terms by 3. If I do that, and I'm going to use brackets here, they're the same thing as parentheses, it's just, like a bigger set of them. It doesn't matter, you can put a parenthesis here if you want to. I'm just going to leave it a bracket. If I take and divide each of these terms by 3, I'm going to be left with n squared plus 7n minus 8. Now I can factor what is inside of this bracket some more. That 3 is going to stay out in front. Now this trinomial is where I will, I have a equal to 1, so I'm going to go straight to my 2 sets of parentheses and kind of do backwards FOIL. To multiply and get n squared, I'm going to multiply n times n. Now I've got to decide about my signs. This is negative. That tells me my signs are going to be opposite. One of them is going to be positive, one of them is going to be negative. So I'm going to put a positive and a negative. And then I'm going to come over here and list my factors of 8. To multiply and get 8, I can do 1 and 8, or I can do 2 and 4. Here's where you got to be picky about which one is positive and which one is negative. Okay, look at your middle term. Because your middle term is positive, in this pair, your big factor is going to be positive. So my 8 will be positive, the 1 is negative. In this pair, the big factor will be positive, the small one will be negative. Okay? Your big factor always matches the sign of the middle term. So now, which of these pair will add to be a positive 7? Well, that is a negative 1 and a positive 8. So I put my 1 where the minus is, the 8 where the positive is. And this is your factored answer. All right, number 14 changes things up just a little bit more. I don't start with an n squared like I have in the last 3 examples. This is an n to the 4th. But something I want you to look at is the fact that this exponent is a 4. The next one is a 2, which is half of the 4. If I look back up here at this one, this exponent is a 2. This one is an n to the 1st, so this is half of my first exponent. A 2 and a 1. This one is half of that exponent. So we can do this here pretty quick and easy. I do not have a greatest common factor here. I'm going to go straight to my 2 parentheses, and then I've got to figure out what do I multiply together to get n to the 4th. Well, I'm going to look at this term. That tells me what I need to put first in each parenthesis. I'm going to multiply n to the 2nd times n to the 2nd. And then I don't worry about the variables anymore. I work on the numbers. So I want to multiply and get a negative 8. Okay, this is negative, so that tells me I'm going to need one of each sign. Then, just like in the last problem, I need numbers that multiply to be 8, so that's 1 and 8, or 2 and 4. My middle one is positive, so I know in each pair the big number is positive, the small one is negative. So now, which pair will add to be a positive 7? Well, that is the negative 1 and the positive 8. Now, this right here can be factored again. So it can be factored more. But we haven't talked about that kind of factoring yet. So for right now, I'm going to leave this and say it's done. Okay, for those of you who remember factoring from Algebra 1, I'm going to go ahead and put the correct answer for this one out here once you factor it again. So that, you know, if you were trying to do this on your own, then you will know if you got the right answer or not. So the n squared plus 8 will stay. The n squared minus 1 factors into n plus 1 times n minus 1. This is the completely factored answer. This is the answer we'll settle for right now until we finish the rest of the factoring notes. Alright, so now we're going to move on to problem number 15. And starting with problem number 15, my A is not 1, and I do not have a GCF. So starting here, these are general trinomials. When A does not equal 1. So here's the way we're going to factor those. I do not have a greatest common factor. So we're going to factor this using the bottoms up method. Now, I don't know if this is the way you learned it in Algebra 1 or not. A long time ago when I taught Algebra 1, I didn't teach it this way because I was not taught this method when I was in school. I stumbled across this method after I'd been teaching for a couple of years, and for most of my students it made factoring this much easier. So I started teaching it that way at that point. And so that's what I'm going to share with you. It's kind of like a shortcut. So if you like shortcuts, this is for you. What we're going to do is we're going to take the first coefficient times my constant, and we're going to move it out there. So when I do that and rewrite, I've now got a 1x squared plus 13x. 2 times negative 7 is negative 14. This is something we should know how to factor. It works just like numbers 11 through 14 did. So 3 terms with no common factor. So 2 parentheses, we're going to do kind of backwards FOIL, and x goes in each one. To multiply and get a negative 14, I'm going to need one of each sign. My factors of 14 are 1 and 14, or 2 and 7. This tells me my big factor in each pair is going to be positive, so the little one's negative. And I need to know which pair of numbers multiplies to be negative 14 but adds to be 13. Well, that is the negative 1 and the 14. But you're not done, because if you multiplied this back together, you would just get x times x is a 1x squared, and I need a 2x squared. So how do we finish it? This is the bottoms up part. If I take a look at what I multiplied by, I multiplied at the beginning by 2. I got to keep this thing balanced. So if I multiplied by 2, now to balance it back out, I'm going to divide by 2 in both parentheses. In the first parentheses, 14 over 2 will simplify to the whole number 7, so I'm going to do that. in the second parenthesis, 1 over 2 does not simplify to a whole number, so I'm going to move the bottom of the fraction up front inside that parenthesis. That's the bottoms up part. I'm going to move the bottom up front in that parenthesis. And that is my final factored answer. Alright, so now number 16. Pause the video, see if you can do it on your own, and then you can come back here with me. Right? So now, when I'm looking at these, I do not have a greatest common factor that I can take out of all three terms. Because it has three terms, no common factor, and this a value is not 1, I'm going to do bottoms up. So I start out by moving the 6 out here and multiplying it. So I get c squared plus 13c plus 36. That is something that I should be able to factor to get a c squared. I'm going to multiply c times c. Because this is positive, I know I'm going to put the same sign in both of these. But what sign is it? Well, this is positive. So I put a positive in both of them. So now my factors of 36, I can multiply 1 times 36. I can do 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and 6 times 6. After that, they all start to repeat. Because I'm putting a positive in each parenthesis, all of these are positive. Which pair of those will add to B13? Well, that's this pair. So I'm going to have C plus 4 and C plus 9. Now, once again, if you stop here and multiply it back together, C times C is a 1C squared, not the 6C squared that we started with. So this answer is not right. We're not finished yet. At the beginning of the problem, I multiplied by 6. So let's go back and divide both of these by 6. I want to reduce the fraction, simplify to whole numbers if we can. So in the first parenthesis, 4 over 6 will not give me a whole number, but it will reduce to 2/3. In the second parenthesis, 9 over 6 will not reduce to a whole number, but it will reduce to 3/2. And now, because both of these are still fractions, I'm going to move the bottom up front in both of those parentheses. So that gives me 3c plus 2 times 2c plus 3. And this is your factored answer. And that takes care of the general trinomial factoring.